Okay, if you listen to people talk who actually know stuff, and I'm not one of them, about philosophy and the history of philosophy and interacting between cultural worldviews and everything, they say that you can look at this lecture, this talk that Paul gave to the world of Athens, and you could teach whole seminars on what it means and what it looks like to interact cross-culturally, to engage with worldviews that are not your own, and also try to convince others of your own that he was so well educated, so profound with what he just did and what we just read, that it would take a long time to get over it and get through it all, and so we just had to edit some of it down. But we're going to look at some of the important parts of what you and I can learn from in this series we're going through called Reaching the World for Jesus. It's the fall, and we've got people who are looking for churches, and people who are moving to town. They're getting their kids in new schools, and then new rec leads, and new churches, and they're looking around, and we're trying to be ready for them. We're trying to be a church who's ready to have new people come in, and new people join in, and new people become part of what we are. And the idea for this series comes from the saying of Jesus where he said, "The harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few." And we've been challenging ourselves to look at this world differently, to look at it through the eyes of Jesus that says, no, the problem that we face as a church is not that the world's too resistant and no one cares about God and God has nothing to offer our world anymore, but rather that there's not enough workers to reach all the people that God would reach. And so Jesus said, pray to the Lord of the harvest and he'll send you more workers so that we can go out and reach this world for Jesus. And we've looked at the first week, we came to this conclusion. We looked at how the book of Acts was written by a guy named Luke to a man named Theophilus. And we said, we think that maybe all that happened was Luke made himself available. Hey, I'm available, God. Send me who you will. And last week we looked at the conversion of Paul, an avid anti-Christian person becoming the Apostle Paul, who we just read about now. And we looked at what goes into the idea of evangelism. We looked at what happens, what goes into the process of conversion. And now we look at this moment where Paul is not getting converted. We're not just being open. We're saying, how do we talk to the world around us? And we see this story, and here we see that Paul is in Athens, and we see the idols and the message and the place. That's the points we're going to have today. The idols, the message, and the place. Point one, the idols. Paul has some time alone. He's been shipped off by his friends for his own safety, and he gets out of Dodge. They send him to a place that is not controlled by religiously Jewish people that can get mad at him. He sends them to Athens. And then they're firmly in the Roman government. This is not the Greek Empire anymore. Alexander the Great's long gone. Plato and Aristotle are long gone. But as you can see, the legacy of the thought, the legacy of their philosophy, the legacy of their great civilization is still alive and well in this city. And Paul looks up one day, and he's in the center of this cultural and intellectual and architectural and artistic hub of the world, Athens, Greece. And he has time on his hands. He starts going sightseeing. And what he sees when he gets there is fascinating. He sees idols. It says he was greatly distressed when he saw that the city was full of idols. When everyone else looked around, they go, oh, no way, wow, what a great city. Man, can you imagine? See, my little town, it's a dump compared to this. Can you imagine if we lived here? Can you imagine if we had all this? Oh, what a great thing. What an amazing place. But Paul's looking around going, these guys, they're chasing all the wrong things. Their city is just submerged in idols. They're missing some of the greatest points in the history of the world. Even in this great metropolis is Athens. They're missing it. And D.A. Carson says his reaction was not based on aesthetics. That's what we go to the great cities for, the aesthetics. Let's see the statues. Let's see the monuments. Let's see how big Abraham Lincoln really is when he's sitting up there, right? Let's see how big the pyramids really were. I want to see them. The aesthetics of it all. But D.A. Carson says, no, his reaction was based on a Christian analysis of the culture. That's what we talked about a little bit last week, right? What we need to build for ourselves is a Christian worldview. a worldview that is shaped by Jesus and the Bible. And what he sees when he starts to look from corner to corner to corner of this city named Athens, he sees idolatry. That word is full. It's like being under. It's like they're submerged. They're swamped in idolatry. It's just everywhere. You can't get away from it. And here's what idolatry is. Here's my definition for it. Idolatry is the kind of devotion that is only worthy of God, directed towards something other than God. It doesn't have to be a certain thing. It doesn't have to be a little statue or a big one. It doesn't matter what it is, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. It matters is that your de facto God? That's the question. When it says, go over here, do you then go, okay, yes, I'll go over here? And it says, hey, give your money to this thing over here. Do you go, okay, fine, I'll give my money? What is it that kind of pushes you around? What is it kind of directs you and says, hey, I want you to do this, and then you go, okay, fine, I'll go do this? Is there something in your life that is a de facto God? Tim Keller came up with a great short answer for what is an idol. He says this: an idol is anything that you look at and you say, if I don't have that, I can't live. Can't live without it. Got to have it. And ultimately, whatever it is, idols don't have to be contending gods out there. Don't have to be. They can be very good things that you've put in the wrong place in your life. You've put above God, or they could be very bad things. But whatever it is, ultimately, an idol is an insult to God. And when Paul walked around Athens, what he saw were the idols. And then he has a message for this city. Point 2, the message. I have something I want to share with you. All right, I'm just going to say that. I see some of you guys are cold. Right at the beginning of the service, you guys all heated up the room super hot, and now so I'm feeling great, though, by the way. So movie theater rules, ladies. Movie theater rules. Bring your own jackets. So this is the point. That's point 1, the idols. Point 2, the message. What did Paul do when he saw the message? It says this in verse 17. It says, so he reasoned in the synagogue with the Jews and the God-fearing Greeks, as well as in the marketplace day by day with those who happened to be there. I love that word, so. He saw the idols. The world is swamped with idols. They're getting pushed around by them. They can't escape from them. So he goes and reasons with them. He engages with them. He starts talking to them. He starts pointing out what's wrong with the fact that you've just got idols everywhere in your life. And here's what I love about the Apostle Paul. Here's one of the great first lessons we can learn from this interaction as we learn how to engage with the world around us. Look where he starts. He catches the ear of some philosophers. The Epicureans and the Stoics were two primary groups of philosophers, the two large thoughts that were going through this world at the time. And they bring them to their gathering called the Areopagus, and they give them center stage. And he says, people of Athens, I see that in every way you are very religious. Those are the first words out of his mouth. That's the first thing he says. Now, I want you to remember what the Bible said was his internal state. His internal state was he's deeply distressed and there's idols everywhere. He's bummed. This is super bad. The whole city is chasing after gods that are not the real God. They're chasing after gods that are not Jesus. And he's fraught. There's all this emotion in his body, and yet he cuts through it. And the first thing he says is, you know what? I've noticed something pretty cool about you guys. I've noticed that you're very religious. He cuts through the emotions. He cuts through his opinions. And he cuts through the fact that they have a different worldview than he does. And he finds something, and he praises what he could. He praises what they have gotten right to whatever extent they have gotten it right. Not surprisingly, this is the man who would go on to write in Philippians 4:8, whatever is praiseworthy, think about such things. Set your mind on things that you can actually be appreciative of. And he takes a moment and he appreciated them, and then And then he starts talking to them some more. And this is really instructive for us today. Paul would go to the synagogues and he would reason with them. And he would go to the marketplace and he would reason with them. And here's the principle. He would always start where the people were and lead them into the gospel. Often in the book of Acts, you would see Paul, and he would reason in the synagogues with the Jewish believers, and he would reason from the Old Testament that the Messiah had to die, and that Jesus rose from the dead, and that Jesus is the guy they've been waiting for. He would start where they were and lead them into the gospel. But there's no mention of the Old Testament in Athens. Rather, he's mentioning their religion, their art. And later he's going to quote their poets. He's going to learn what they think and say, you know, guys, you actually already kind of agree with me to a certain extent. What I'm saying is not as crazy as it may sound right now because you already kind of believe it. Your own poets have said that we're God's offspring. Your own poets have said that we live and move and have our being in this God. I'm just telling you who that God is. He starts where they are, and he leads them to the gospel. And what this means for you and me is that we have to have cultural awareness. If we're going to reach our world for Jesus, we have to have an understanding of where our world is coming from. We will have to have seen the movies, and we have to have heard the songs. And we need to know why it is that our world tells the stories they tell. We need to know why it is that our world works so hard the way they work. We need to know why our world operates the way it does. Michael, who sits right over here, laughs at me every time because he's like, he can see it coming. I can see it on his face. He goes, Garrett's about to quote a super inappropriate movie right now. And, and I always make a great point with it, don't I, Michael? Yeah, okay. But that's because we got to be able to start where our world is and move where they're going. This happened last night. I was on X, and there's this guy, I guess I follow him, or he just ended up in my algorithm. He always would say, just some question says, best whatever movie scene, go. I'll start, and then he does his thing, and then you go. So best villain, best whatever. And he said, just best moment, whatever it was. And a bunch of people put the same answer. It said, and they would say, a battle-exhausted Captain America standing down the most difficult, powerful villain in the history of Marvel and his giant army. And he's refusing to give up. Now, do you think there's a reason so many people in our culture resonated with that moment? Do you think there's a reason why so many people want to see a hero that won't give up? Did you know that there's a story in the Bible where Jesus spends the entire night in such distress that he's sweating drops of blood? And he gets turned over to the Roman Empire, and he is beaten within an inch of his life, beaten beyond being recognizable, and he still had the courage and the wherewithal to climb the hill of Calvary and stand down against death and sin and say, you're not stopping me. Do you know that our culture is actually already longing for that gospel story where that sometimes, there's got to be a hero. There's got to be someone who stands in the gap and says, you shall not pass. And we go, that guy actually exists. There actually is a hero stronger than you could never live up to. And he stood in the gap for you. His name's Jesus Christ. And he went after. And our world doesn't know that our biggest, greatest enemy is sin and death. But they do know they need a hero sometimes. And he starts where the people are, and he leads them into the gospel. But he doesn't leave them there. He then starts pressing on them. He then starts walking into their worldview and saying, here's what you need to understand. Here's what you're missing. He says this, look, I I found this inscription, this God you worship, and he's called the unknown God. There's a God you worship that you don't even understand. You don't even know who he is, but you're worshiping him because you just want to make sure you didn't leave anybody out. And that's the God I've come to tell you about. And guess who he is? Verse 24. He is the God who made the world and everything in it. Oops. That's the God you left out? You have the God of the sun and the God of war and the God of sheep and the God of everything. You left out the God who made the world and everything inside of it? Yikes. You're bad. Well, good news. I've come to tell you about him. And he starts giving this logical strain of thought where he says, now listen, if it's the case that there's a God big enough to create the world, doesn't it also follow that there's a God big enough to create everything in the world? And if that's the case, doesn't it also follow that you shouldn't be finding gods in gold and silver and stone and shaped by your own hands and made like little trinkets because that God made all those things that you're worshiping? Doesn't it make sense that if there's a God like that, we don't need the rest of the gods? And he starts pushing them towards not pantheism, not polytheism, but monotheism. There's a God who created everything. He says, listen, don't worship the stars. Worship the God who made the stars. Don't worship however much money you can make in a lifetime. There's a God who made you and gave you that skill set, and gave you that aptitude, gave you that ability to learn and go work with the world that way. Don't worship your own success. Worship the God that created you the way he did. And Paul says this in verse 27:6. He says, he marked out the appointed times in history and the boundaries of their lands. Now, I want you to think about this. Is a great line. I want you to think, I've actually been to Athens, Greece. I've been to the Areopagus. It's also known as Mars Hill. Okay, I've been there. It's such a famous tourist spot in Athens that the rock is like kind of slippery and smooth because people have worn it down over the years. And it's a hill. It's an actual hill. And above it, behind Paul, is the Acropolis. That is the temple for Athena and other things in government. Because Athena is the goddess of Athens, right? That's where it got its name. And then down from Mars Hill, you can see the rest of Athens. And you can see peppered throughout Athens temples. Temple to this god, temple to that god, temple to this god over here. And what are those temples? Those temples are places where the Athenians had marked out the boundaries where those gods rule. In this temple, we will worship this God. And this God is in charge as long as he's in these boundaries. But then you cross the street, you walk into this temple, and there's this God, and this God gets to rule in this area, and he's in charge here. And then you go down the block a little bit, there's another God. Now, we don't do that. We don't do that here in America because we don't have a bunch of little other gods that we worship. We have a different term that describes what we do. We say we put God in a box. We say, God, your job, you get this hour and a half on Sunday morning. And then I go out into my life. And I'll do what I do there. And this is your boundary. You get it in here. That's what you get. And Paul's going, no. We don't draw up the boundaries for him. He draws up the boundaries for us. We don't create things for him. He doesn't live because we have done all this work to give him room to live. No, he's existed far before the world. He created us. It is in him that we live and move and have our being. We exist inside of him, not the other way around. You don't get to draw boundaries for God. God has drawn our boundaries inside which we live. And he says that the reason God did this is verse 27, so that people might seek him. And maybe even reach out for him. And get this, and find him. That's why God has done what he has done to get us to the places we find ourselves right now, so that we might ultimately find God. And I love this line, because he is not far from any one of us. Too many of us spend our lives thinking that we are too far gone, that we have run too far, that we have made too big of a mess. And Paul's sitting there going, yeah, but as you run, he chases. As you flee, he pursues. And as we finally look up one day and we turn around and we seek God, we find actually he was not very far away, because he pursued us every step of the way. And this is the point where you have to kind of go 1, 2, skip a few and miss other things. But he ends up saying this. This is what Paul says. You wanted me just to preach for an hour and a half, right? It's such a good chapter, am I right? Okay, you see it. Here's what he says. Verse 31, he says, God, he has given proof of this to everyone by raising him, Jesus, from the dead. And it is at this point where they start scoffing. It is at this point where Paul's cool, interesting new idea goes from cool and interesting to, what are you, an idiot? What are you talking about? He rose from the dead? Because the resurrection is always the hardest pill to swallow for people looking into Christianity. Don't be shocked by that. Of course it's going to be the hardest part to accept. Like that's just, of course, yeah. How often do you see people rise from the dead? I mean, you know, I have never seen one. I know Jesus did. And at that point, we see that some people became followers and they believed, and others sneered and they mocked. And there's still a handful over here that said, you know, I'm still interested in entertaining these interesting ideas, but you're crazy, bro. And as we see in this interaction, Paul addresses them. He starts where they're going. He leads them to the gospel, teaches them about Jesus Christ. And then we see what we talked about last week, the basic essence of evangelism. The 4 words, God, man, Jesus, response. God created, man rebelled, Jesus intervened, and now you have a response to make. And some mocked, some sneered. It's going to happen. But did you notice? They didn't even name all the people who became believers that day. Because it was not just, the Bible does this all the time. It always slow plays itself. It's like there's a time in the gospel, it's like, Jesus, because of their lack of faith, Jesus couldn't do any miracles. I mean, he healed some people and he laid hands. I mean, he healed like a handful of people, but like, we're going, that's kind of a lot, you know what I mean? Like, handful of people, that's a lot of people to heal. There's a handful of people that believed that day. In the middle of the intellectual center of Greece. They're like, yeah, I'm with that guy now. Because Jesus was right. That the harvest is plentiful. There really are people who will turn to God. Now, here's where I want us to end today. I want us to look at this final aspect, the place. Where did Paul go? It says in verse 17, it says, he reasoned in the marketplace. Now, of course, the NIV had to put the word marketplace there, but because we wouldn't know what it was talking about if it didn't just say marketplace. But it does nothing to explain where he actually went. Where he really went was the agora, or the agora, however you would pronounce another language like that. The agora. It is this historic and monumental thing in history that we will never see again. It was this all-inclusive nexus of the Greek universe place. You didn't go to the grocery store, although you could get groceries there. The agora was the center of life. It was where you would find the food and clothing you needed, but you'd also find the arts there. You'd find law there. You would find philosophers, obviously, there. You'd find academia there. You would find dance and singing and the news media. Heralds would come out and give the latest stories of what the Caesar said or what's happening around the Roman world. And you would find all of it there in this one place called the agora, the marketplace, where everything collided right there. And Paul sees it and goes, that's where I'm going. That's where I'm going to find. That's the place, he said, that's what the gospel needs to be doing. It's not going to just sit here in the city. Yes, he started in the synagogues, he started in the churches, but it went out into the world. And he reasoned with them there. And here's the problem. We will never see a marketplace like that again. The closest thing I can think of something like that in American life was, remember back in the 90s when if you were an up-and-coming band, you had to go do shows in a mall. You know what I mean? Remember that? No one remembers that? Okay. You can look. It's on YouTube somewhere. You can find it. But there's no one location that we can go to anymore and say, here we are. Because it's spread out. It's in different places. And so the question that we need to ask as a church is we're asking the question, how do we reach the world for Jesus? It's this. How can we, as Foothills Christian Church, find our ways into the agora of Winston-Salem, Clemens, Louisville, and Pofftown? How can we find our ways into these places? Because if you want to engage with the arts and the music and comedy and drama and theater, you got to go somewhere. They're not going to be in the same place where the legal field is. They're going to be somewhere else. It's not going to be the same place as where I go every once in a while to the Chamber of Commerce in Louisville and Clemens. That's somewhere else. And as each of these different places we go, guess what you're going to find there? You're going to find idols, things that kind of dictate how they live their lives, and things that we could speak into. And I haven't even mentioned yet our school system, or the ever-growing homeschool movement, or fashion, or YouTube, or anything else. It is all part of our current-day modern agora that the church needs to find a way to be present in. And here's the deal. No one church can reach it all. You just can't do it. Even if we lived in a village, one church wouldn't reach that whole place. Different churches reach different kinds of people, and that's always been a thing. But can I suggest something? Can I read one of the lines that we've just read in a slightly different way and apply it in a slightly different way? Verse 26 says this, "From one man he made all the nations, that they should inhabit the whole earth, that he marked out for their appointed times in history, and the boundaries of their lands." God did this. So I love this line. God did this. Go to the next slide for me. One more time. God did this so that they would seek him and find him. May I suggest that maybe God has directed the boundaries of your life so that other people may seek him and find him? Is it possible that God has positioned you in certain places that this church as a whole does not have access to? That you have access to 5 days a week, known as your workplace, or your schools, or your rec leagues? That this church, under the authority of our church, can't just go walking into, but you walk into every day of the week in your neighborhoods. And maybe God has done that so that other people would maybe seek God and maybe hopefully find him. How can we enter into the agora in different places of Winston-Salem, Louisville, Clemens, and Pofftown? And it's at this point, you all know how sermons work. Everyone knew where this Everyone knew where this sermon series was going, and you're all going, please don't get to this point where you actually ask me to share my faith with somebody. Here's what I want to ask as a commitment, as a body of believers. Week 1, we said, what if we just committed to being available? God, if you send someone my way, whatever you want to happen will happen, but I'm available. What about this baby step? Since I know it's nerve-wracking, and the whole week next week is going to be about the difficulties of sharing your faith, and we all know it. We all know the feeling of that. Okay, but here's a baby step. What if we just commit that God, I'm not going to short-circuit the normal flow of my relationships. If you have a friendship with somebody, and the time comes when they would normally, if nothing changed, they would just normally learn that, yeah, you're a Christian or you were at church this weekend or something was going on, say, okay, I'm not going to short-circuit that conversation. I'm not going to short-circuit that thing and go out of my way to make it sound like I never go to church anywhere. If the topic comes up, I'll just say, yeah, I was at church. Or if the conversation leads that direction where you would naturally say, you know, it's funny, I was actually reading about something kind of like that in the Bible this morning. And that's all you have to say about it. Oh, isn't that cool that even the Bible speaks on something like that that's in this book over here? How cool is that? And you just, can that be a commitment we make? God, I'm not going to short circuit the normal flow of my conversations and friendships that I have with people. And let's just start there and see what God does with it. And now, here's my final thing. I want you to clear your schedules, everybody. August 28th. I haven't even talked to the 2 Bible studies that meet here on August 28th, but they're going to be happy about it. August 28th, here at this church building, we're going to be doing a thing I'm calling the creative team meeting. I want all of you to actually, I'm going to take a picture of the room because when I make a list of people, I always leave somebody off the list. Okay, no hiding. Don't get in the. Don't hide your heads. Okay, I got you. What I think would be cool is if we got together as a church and we started putting ideas on the wall. And we said things like, what if we did X? And I want to hear the worst ideas you've got. Yeah, there you go, right? I just want to hear, I don't want you don't filter it, okay? Just throw them out there. Well, what if we, as a church, started tailgating in one of the high school parking lots before the football games and just made ourselves available to the world? What if we did things out in the world? What are some things we could do to get ourselves out there where we let the world know we're available? I don't know what a good idea is. I don't know what a bad idea is. What I'm going to do is I'm going to get them on index cards, and I'm going to basically come up for myself a Rolodex. And every once in a while, I'm going to pick them out and flip through them and go, actually, that was a better idea than any of us thought. Let's try that one. Because as a church, here's where we stand as a church. Building teams is the only option we have. We're not in a position to hire more staff and get people to cover this or that or the other. Building teams is the only option we have. And if we're going to reach the world for Jesus, we're going to do it together. So what if? What if we went and found our world where they were and led them to the gospel?